Buenos días. ¿Cómo estás? Okay, ask me. Not estás. I'm 61 years old. I'm your teacher. I'm not your buddy. Use the usted form. Así, gracias. Así. ¿Cómo te llamas? ¿Cómo te llamas? Okay, ask me. Not llamas. ¿Cómo se llama? Usted, use usted. Me llamo señor Nesby. Mucho gusto. ¿Cuántos años tienes? Okay, now you can ask me. It's a little impertinent, but you can ask me anyway. Go ahead. Yeah. Tengo 61 años. Momentito, yo tengo algo para ti. Aquí está. $1. Es para ti. Toma. No, no hay de qué. No hay de qué. ¿Cómo? ¿Tú tienes algo para mí? Sí. Oh, qué simpático, qué generoso. Gracias. $1. Muchas gracias. Bueno, ya es tarde. Me tengo que ir. Adiós. Okay, were you able to enter into that conversation with me already? Probably it's a little early for most of you to really know these expressions as well as you'll need to. Why is it important to know these expressions? 2 reasons. First of all, when you're living in another country and you're not a native speaker of that language, you want to make as good an impression as you possibly can on the people you meet. The very first ground rule really is to be polite, to use the polite conversational expressions as frequently and as regularly as you can. And then secondly, these expressions are so commonly used, they're so frequent in conversation that you'll use 1 or 2 of them probably in every conversation with a Spanish-speaking person. And so you really want to have them down pat like that. So they're very critical. Well, let's go into lesson 1.13 to see if you really understood what those pictures had to say within the scenario of the gentleman who was delivering a document to the home of this young lady. Here we go. Well, as you can see, we're here in the heart of lesson 1.13 in the conversation between this young girl and the gentleman who comes to her home with an important document of some kind. And to begin with, she greets him. He responds with a greeting. Then he asks her the first question. He asks how she is. He says, ¿Cómo estás? Notice that he uses the familiar form. He says, estás, because he's speaking to a younger person, and he's a person more in authority. He's an older person, an adult whom she does not know. So he's free to use a familiar with her, but she, after she responds saying she's fine, she asks him the same question, and she must use the formal form with him because he's an adult. And she therefore asks him, ¿Cómo está? She chops the S off the end of the verb, and of course uses usted. ¿Cómo está usted? He says, oh, he's just okay, so. And then he asks her what her name is. He says, ¿Cómo te llamas? Again, hear that sound at the end of the verb. She responds with her name, and then he presents himself to her and indicates that he's glad to meet her. She says, likewise, I'm very pleased to meet you. And then he asks her one final question about herself. He asks, how old are you? ¿Cuántos años tienes? Hear that again at the end of the verb. Now you might ask yourself, tienes, what's tienes mean? What's that verb? Well, later on you'll learn it corresponds to this gesture. It's the verb tener. But for the time being, these expressions, you do not need to know what each individual word means. All you need to do is to memorize. In fact, if you were to know what each individual word meant, it would sound rather awkward in English if I were to translate them for you. So memorize the expressions and then make the slight adaptation corresponding to whether the person is someone you're showing particular respect to or if it's a person you're speaking to on a familiar basis. Okay, so he says, ¿Cuántos años tienes? Speaking familiarly, She, if she were to have the courage to ask him the question, would say, ¿Cuántos años tiene usted? She wouldn't put the s at the end of the verb. And in any case, she gives him the response. She tells how old she is. And then the gentleman offers her this document. She thanks him very much, and he says, oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. And then this is a rather bizarre transaction that takes place right now. I suppose it's a random act of kindness or something. She goes and gets him a jar of salsa just out of the profound gratitude of her heart. And he thanks her profusely, and she says, oh, it's nothing, it's nothing. And last of all, the two of them say goodbye one to another. So these expressions are extremely common. They're very critical because they'll be used so frequently. They demonstrate that you're a polite person as you master them and use them in the appropriate situation and use them invariably, frequently. And so this is the time now for you to go back into lesson 1.13 and get to know them very well. And when we get to lesson 114, the next one, at the beginning of the lesson, I'll check to see, I'll try and carry on that conversation with you again. Maybe I'll have something more dynamic than a dollar bill. Maybe I'll have a jar of salsa for you. But we'll see if you've mastered those expressions at the beginning of the next lesson. Okay, back to lesson 113. Go to work. Adios.